Hello everyone, and welcome back to Deltarune Theories. I've been playing Deltarune on stream a little bit, and of course, that has made me think more about the Deltarune theories I wanted to make videos on. Now, one of the big reasons why I don't make more theories is that editing sucks, and I don't like doing it. And I also generally don't have time to do it between video uploads. It gets a little bit hectic. Anyway, instead of doing a bunch of editing, I put together a PowerPoint. So, you know, like my normal videos, basically, except a little bit more put together, perhaps. A little bit more presentable. Still, this is going to be basically me rambling. I mean, I have points, but as always. But I'm not reading off a script because it'll be robotic and even harder to listen to without visuals. So this is going to be very natural. So if you want to do something else while listening to this video, that's a-okay. You're not going to miss much. Alright, so let's start. What the hell's going on with Deltarune's closet? You know the closet I'm talking about. Ralsei's closet, you know. The strange dark fountain that seems to go against everything we know about dark fountains so far. So let's begin. Part 1. And this is the thing that really got me thinking about the closet. A little ray of light. Now this area that's in this picture here, which is the area from Chapter 2 where we can jump in and out of the Castletown Dark World, obviously didn't exist in Chapter 1. And you could make an argument that that's just for gameplay convenience. Obviously in Chapter 1 we had to play Chapter 1 still, so having this teleport back to the light world would kind of ruin the pacing. But is there a way that we could justify this within the game? And if there is, and it's logical enough, can that potentially tell us anything about how dark worlds work? Because they're still very mysterious. There's still so much about them we don't know. And I love trying to figure it out. So anyway, let's begin. Photon readings negative. Ooh, a classic quote. So photons, if you don't know, are essentially the little particles that create light. So photon readings negative really doesn't make sense to us because that's not something that can really happen, at least on Earth, maybe out in space. But generally when a room is dark, it's because there's no photons in it, or there's a lack of photons. Photons don't go negative. So photons readings negative potentially could create a scenario like we see in Deltarune with these dark fountains that seem to be emitting darkness as if it were light. They're emitting negative light, you know? They're consuming the light from the other room instead of just being consumed by it, which is what would normally happen. But interestingly, this little effect where the darkness seems to leak out of the fountain doesn't happen after the first time you open the door to the fountain. It's a little weird, right? You'd think if these fountains are really like negative photon creations or whatever that can leak darkness as if it were light, that'd be something they could always do. So the question is, why in Chapter 2 with the computer lab and Chapter 1 with the closet the first time, do they create these light rays, or darkness rays, rather? And in Chapter 2, when we go to the closet, does it not? And the easiest answer would be, oh, well, the fountains are just forming. That's why. They're new fountains. But does that make sense? Now, this might just be my own personal feeling on the matter, but the Closet Dark World does not feel like it's a new fountain. You know what I mean? Because if that were the case, then that would mean that the night just went and created two fountains right beside each other. And it's not impossible that could be the case, but it brings up the question of, then why is the night not making multiple fountains all over the place? You know what I mean? Right now we have the plausible deniability to say, oh, well, maybe it takes a lot of energy to create a dark fountain, so the night literally can't. But if the Closet Dark Fountain is new, then that goes away, and the question becomes a lot weirder. So, what if there's another explanation? What if it actually has to do with natural light? So, as we see, these pictures show, in Chapter 1, when we enter the closet the first time, we leave the door open. Or Susie does, or does Chris do it? I don't remember. Anyway, the door is left open. And they can walk around in the closet as if nothing is wrong. It's longer than it should be, but other than that, nothing is wrong. So, is it true, maybe, that natural light, the introduction of photons, aka photon readings no longer being negative, is that able to halt a dark fountain completely? Like, if there was a window, let's say, in a room where a dark fountain was created, when the sun shone through that window, would the dark fountain dissipate? It kind of makes sense, right? Because if you need this darkness to exist in order for the dark fountain to exist, then if there's a bunch of light diffusing all of that darkness, maybe the dark world can't exist anymore. Maybe. And it seems to be the case here, because as soon as the door is slammed on us and no more light is leaking through, that is when we fall into the closet. And I know it's natural light because of this little nice framing from the end of Chapter 1 where we see the light leaking through the windows on the other side of the wall that we can't see. So light does actually shine, natural light does actually shine into this hallway. And I think that's important because it can't just be all light that can dissipate a dark fountain, because it's the little lights that show when like a computer is on or like the server room, they don't break through the darkness, clearly, in Chapter 2. So it would have to be either a large amount of light, like enough that would leak through windows during the peak of daytime, or strictly natural light. And yeah, that makes some sense to me. And it also might make some sense as to why we can get trapped in Chapter 1, because all the person who trapped us in the closet would have to do is, like, cover the scene. And then, we're stuck. Which is where I think our fancy little teleporter here comes into play. This little ray of light is potentially the sunlight leaking through through the closet seam and into this dark fountain. It's essentially creating a gap in the darkness that we can ride up and escape. A bit of an interesting thing, but it makes some sense. That means this is the safest dark world. The Chapter 3 dark world that we're about to enter into, it's actually going to be the safest dark world that we've ever been in. Because not only did Chris open the door, but of course we have the two large windows in the room as well, which would create huge beams of light, potentially even enough to diffuse the entire dark fountain, in the same way that the closet seemingly was diffused. And if that's the case, then, hey... Chris actually made a pretty safe dark fountain. Good for them. They're not trying to kill everybody. I'm sure of it. And it might mean that in Chapter 3, we actually don't seal the dark fountain. Maybe we just get booted out. One of the reasons I think that is because the Weathers are a character that got showed off during the Spampton sweepstakes, and they're weather forecasters. And generally, the weather is played in the morning. So... that leads us to believe that this chapter is going to take place over the entire night, and that by morning, maybe we'll be almost finished. There's also a line by Sham that I'm just now remembering that is a very probably important line to this theory. He says something along the lines of, you don't want to get caught around here when the sun goes down. Which is very interesting, because that would mean there's no escape when the sun goes down. You can't leave. It also might make sense why Ralsei wanted to set up bedrooms for Susie and Chris in the case that they ever do get stuck there because somebody covers up the door or something. Anyway, moving on. So, like, sure, we've explained one facet of the Closet Dark World, but there's so much more juicy stuff to talk about when it comes to this closet. We can't leave it at that. So what is the closet? There's so many questions. Can we answer them all concisely? What if I said maybe? So if the closet is just a closet, and the dark world just exists in there, then are like all the cliffs shelves and all those weird things dust and mold? Why can all darkners exist in the closet regardless of their theming? Because theming seems to be what petrifies darkners. Like Lancer doesn't fit with the theming of the cyber world, Zoe turns into a statue. Same with Rules. But they can all exist in harmony in the castle town. Why? Speaking of, if it is just a closet, why is there a castle in it? Like, the castle in the Card Kingdom is a cabinet, at least as far as we think. And Queen's Mansion is a server room. So what would that be in a closet full of shelves? Like another cabinet? But is it just empty? Like, what creates this weird bluish aesthetic? You know what I mean? There must be something. And if so, if there is an aesthetic to this dark world, why do the other darkners not have to adhere to it? And why, when we are thrust into the closet dark fountain for the first time, do we fall like this? Is it just because we're not ready? I mean, it's possible. But the floor seems to give out. Is that just because the dark fountain was happening? That seems a little weird, right? There is an argument to be made that, like, in Chapter 2, when you jump into a dark fountain, it does seem like you're falling as you, like, do the magical girl transformation sequence and then land on the ground. But that just begs more questions about why the closet dark fountain the first time was so different from that. You know what I mean? Anyway, what if the fountain isn't in the closet? Please? 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 What is happening? Okay. We made it. What if we actually did fall down? Now, this is a very reachy idea, but I do have some fun evidence that might convince you. So, I'm showing you an image of the bunker. And as a bunker is, it is generally a series of tunnels that run underneath the ground. And this is like the only bunker in town. So it must be like a storm shelter or like from the Cold War, like a nuclear bunker or like something. It's clearly old and not well used. But if it is a bunker that's meant to serve for the entirety of hometown, even if it was like 50 years ago and that was like 5 or 6 families, that's still a good amount of people. So I think there's a good chance that this thing could run under a lot of the town, if not even just a little. And if that is the case, then that means there could be tunnels running underneath the school and the computer lab, potentially. Maybe even the church or the mayor's office. All places with double doors that we could potentially have a dark fountain in. And the reason why I think there might be a dark fountain in the bunker is because while it plays the dark gastery noises when you're near it. And look, I didn't really want to emphasize this as evidence because it was something that I assumed that not everybody assumes, but it's a good time to talk about it. When Ralsei talks about the roaring in Chapter 2, he shows the 3 titans that come out, or at least he shows 3 titans. And he says it to Birdley when Birdley's about to create a 3rd dark fountain, because there's the Castletown dark fountain, there's the Computer Lab dark fountain, and he's about to create another one. So I assumed, and I may be probably wrong, that 3 dark fountains are all it takes to tilt the balance and create the roaring. Which, if that is true, that means the bunker cannot have a dark fountain in it, because that would be the 3rd fountain on top of the computer lab plus the closet, or it would be the 3rd fountain on top of the computer lab plus the abandoned classroom. Unless, of course, the closet dark fountain is the bunker. But let me explain why I think this is true, if it'll let me. Okay, holes. So I'm showing a picture right now, and it's a picture of the cliffs from Chapter 1. Now, in the background, there's a bunch of these weird protrusions. That's the best way I can describe them. They're just protrusions. And they look like, to me, because of this, but also because they just look weird, they look like broken floorboards. You know what I mean? When floorboards kind of peel up a bit because something's poking through them, perhaps. So, my thought would be, what if the floor actually broke when the closet door was closed? And maybe it's due to the darkness. Because if the bunker is a tunnel running underneath that closet, and also the abandoned classroom, but we'll get there, maybe closing the dark fountain, or the knight potentially wanting to make a fountain in the the closet but not being able to, and creating a hole in the floor where the darkness could leak through. Perhaps a buildup like that created made the floor break, and then we fell into it. Because it looks like if these are actually meant to represent the broken floorboards that we just fell down, it looks like they exploded up, right? Not down. So something from underneath them exploded up. Maybe darkness for a dark fountain. And then the cliffs that we ride down, these grayish cliffs with strange creatures on them, perhaps that's the tunnel that was created down to the bunker when the darkness blew up or whatever. These little edges, these cliffs that we're riding down, are actually just tiny little edges of this hole. Because we know things get magnified in the dark world, like a carpet becomes a huge sprawling field and forest. So it's not beyond the realm of belief to think that a hole in the ground could become a sprawling mass of cliffs that lead down deeper and deeper. Oh wow, it just worked that time. Speaking of deeper, let's talk about the secret bosses. I can't have a video without talking about the secret bosses. So, if this is the case, if the bunker is running underneath the town, and if the darkness can peek up through holes in the ground, there's also potential that there could be, hatches. If the bunker was meant to be this place where you'd go in case of an emergency, there could be hatches in important buildings around the town, like, say, a school or a library. These very public places where you'd want to get people to safety quickly. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, a hole in the ground. It could actually just be, a hatch that we can open, that just a little bit of darkness is leaking through because the hatches are obviously closed. So let's talk about the secret boss areas. Jevel's prison, which is the basement of the card castle. And I said earlier, the card castle, I have an image. Oh, here we go. The card castle is this cabinet that you can see in the image I have here with the little Gerson drawing on it and all the cards strewn out from it. So underneath that cabinet is thought to be Jevel's prison. And not only is it very dark down there, obviously, but potentially maybe they put this cabinet on top of the hatch or hole or whatever's underneath there to cover it up a bit, so that nobody tries to play with it, given it's a classroom. If this is the case, then Jevel would be exposed to the pure darkness, whatever we want to call it, from the bunker. And potentially the resident of the bunker, that being either Gaster or some other force that is very dark and living down there in this super dark fountain. Now, Spampton's doesn't share a resemblance to the card castle like Jevel's does. However, Spampton and the basement of Queen's Mansion, which Queen's Mansion is thought to be the server room in the closet, which you can see in this image, which makes some sense. I mean, she's the admin or whatever program of the server. Well, she's a laptop, actually, but she's got admin privileges on the laptop or something like that. That was the thought behind it anyway. It might have been my thought. It might have been somebody else's thought. I don't remember at this point. Anyway, it's thought to be in the server room. Even if it's not and it's under that table that is also shrouded in darkness, it could be under there too. Regardless, the Spampton basement doesn't look like the card castle or Jevel's prison, but the library is farther away from that area than the other two are, obviously. Spampton had to contact the mysterious benefactor that was helping him on the phone rather than talking to him in person, which is what Jevil apparently probably did. But there is something weird that happens, and that's this little smiley guy, hey, little smiley friend, that appears while we're down in Spamton's basement very briefly, called image_friend. Now, I watched a whole video on this. I genuinely don't remember who it was who made it. Maybe I can find it and put a card here, but I probably won't remember. Remind me in the comments, please. But it was a video talking about all the files that are capitalized in Deltarune's, the game of Deltarune. And all of them are related to Gaster, because Gaster kind of speaks in all caps. It's kind of a thing he does. So, like, the Goner Maker segment, which is the part that plays at the very beginning of the game when you're making your character that gets discarded, is all in caps. And, of course, another him is also all in caps, and that's very Gastery. This little smiley friend is named image_friend in all caps. And it's very weird, then, that it would be something weirdly random Gaster-related in this area, when really he shouldn't be able to get there, right? Unless he's living in the bunker underneath the entire town, and there's a little darkness leaking up into the bottom of the computer lab, just the same as it was at the school, and that's how he was able to contact Spamton. It's a little bit wild, but it only gets wilder from here. That's how my theory videos go. So anyway, these two fountains, the one in the computer lab and the one in the unused classroom, both exist in rooms without windows, where no natural light could leak into them. You can see you can kind of trace our path in the Chapter 1 Dark Fountain across the carpet here, then across the board, and over through Card Kingdom, and up the cabinet, eventually to get to the top of the cabinet tower. Interestingly, the Dark Fountain that's at the Card Kingdom seems to be coming from beneath the cabinet. Just a little interesting little tidbit there. Kind of the same with Queen's Fountain. It's coming from underneath her mansion, which is either the server room or on top of that table. You know, just a little interesting. Anyway, if there are little holes in the floor to the bunker and the darkness underneath there, it might explain why Spamton and Jevil were able to contact Gaster, despite the fact that obviously he can't walk around and talk to them. Alright. As a final note, what if it could get darker than dark? So the real question is, why would Gaster be making a dark fountain in the bunker? Like, sure, it's a secluded place, but why exactly? He could make it, like, he could have his own lab. He could just have a house of his own that he's going to make a dark fountain in. He could just cover up the windows. It's not that hard. Well, what if we want to compress the darkness? There's been a lot of darkness and water connections, you know? In the sweepstakes, we had What If It Could Get Darker Than Dark, this quote I'm using, where it's a chair with water sounds playing behind it, and then, you know, it gets all darkified. And similarly, when you enter the Dark World for the first time in Chapter 1, you can hear, like, wave crashing sounds before you can get up. And we know now, because of the ending of Chapter 2, that the dark fountains are created from, like, a gas. It's, you know, like a fog or steam or something. Maybe, if dark fountains are created from a gaseous substance, you can condense them. Maybe you can condense that darkness into a liquid. Something kind of watery, perhaps. But to do so, you'd have to put it in a confined space. Somewhere where light can't leak in and ruin it. Somewhere where it can't escape. Somewhere like underground. And maybe the bunker was just the most convenient place. That's the end of this theory. I hope you enjoy it. There's also the possibility that if this is true, that every time we are stabbing into the ground to create a dark fountain, we're literally just stabbing a hole into the bunker and darkness is leaking up. But I didn't want to quite go that far because it reaching all the way underneath the Dreemurr's house seems like a little bit of a stretch. It's why I think we might not be able to clear the dark fountain in Chapter 3 right away, because I don't think Ralsei might be able to get here. Ralsei's ability to travel to the computer lab is very strange, right? But if it's connected through the bunker, it makes a lot of sense. He can just go from the castle down part of the bunker, through the bunker dark world, and up through the little hole that exists for Spammed in the basement, and then make it to the dark world where we are. Through time warpy shenanigans. You know how it is. We know Queen doesn't notice him, so he very likely could have just walked through the Dark Fountain without anybody even noticing he was there. Especially if he was using, like, his cloaked form or anything. He can change forms! So, can't say it's not possible. And if that is true, that the reason he was able to get to the computer lab is because he was traveling through that dark world, then it makes sense why he can't, he wouldn't be able to get to the Chapter 3 Dark Fountain here that's in the Dreemurr house, because it's not connected to the bunker. It's literally as far away from the bunker as possible. So, yeah. And I'm not saying that Rouse is strictly required to take out a fountain, because obviously in the Snowgrave route, Chris can just do it on their own. But I do think his help is helpful, because he knows about the Dark Worlds. And if we've got, like, Toriel as our healer instead or something, I have a feeling that she's just going to want to get the kids away from danger as quickly as possible, which might lead to, you know, us escaping the Dark World through different means than normal, just to show that it's possible to set up for a later date when maybe the entire town gets covered in darkness for, like, the festival or something, which we set up in Chapter 2 as well. So yeah, with that, the video is actually definitely over. You know what? You should like it if you enjoyed, and subscribe. Hopefully, I can keep this format up and do a little bit of Deltarune theory every now and then, instead of just a big one every long time in between, like months in between. So yeah, tell me what you think. I'm sure I've missed stuff, and I'm sure you have plenty of refutations and also support for me in the comments. So keep it up. I'll keep reading them. And eventually we'll figure this thing out when the game comes out. Anyway, bye-bye.